Africa has to be part of the conversation to participate in the development and use of AI. Access and data costs a lot.
Yes.
Devices cost a lot.
Yeah.
If you compare the cost of data and devices, Africa has some of the highest costs. So we have to do something about that. Oh, and young. Oh, that's the thing that I find most exciting about Africa, which is it's a young population. It's entrepreneurial as heck. Look at you, right? Yes. Look at the things that you're doing, right?
I mean,
there's a lot of African entrepreneurs who are doing extraordinary things. So let's not limit them. Let's not put roadblocks in them.
This is our conversation with James Manyika, Google Senior Vice President for Research, Technology, and Society.
What that means, I oversee and lead a lot of our teams working in Google Research, building foundational models, doing all the AI work, all the way up to quantum computing. Yeah. And also Google Labs, where we experiment with all the AI technological possibilities that are now possible. And then also we have this function across the whole company called Technology and Society, where we're thinking hard about how do we make sure these technologies can benefit people the most, and how do we do it responsibly? Yeah. So all of that is a lot of what I spend all my time doing, and it's important and fun and exciting work.
Today we talk about AI's potential on the continent, its opportunities, challenges, and everything in between. This conversation happened during the United Nations General Assembly Week in New York. Without further ado, let's get to the video.
I've been in the US for about 24 years, 25 years. But I grew up in Zimbabwe, and then I did my PhD at Oxford. So I did my PhD in AI and robotics before it was kind of cool, I guess, at that time.
I've been in the US for 2 weeks.
For 2 weeks? What do you think?
It's cool. This is my first time in the US.
Yeah.
I first went to Washington, Boston, and here now. AI is like the hot topic right now. Everybody's talking about AI. What do you see as like the concern or the opportunities that we sort of have now with AI? What are you seeing today?
Well, let's talk about both of those. I think if I think about the opportunities and the possibilities of AI, I think of them in kind of a few different areas. First, I think about how these technologies can help individuals with everyday tasks, but also in kind of their most ambitious, creative, imaginative things that they want to do. So you've got those kinds of benefits for people, but also benefits that help them address barriers. So think about barriers to language, things like Google Translate help with that. So then the other part of the opportunity that I see is the opportunity to power the economy. So I think about all the things that entrepreneurs, small and medium-sized businesses need, sectors of the economy we need to improve, like agriculture, healthcare, a lot of that, including even public sector services where governments are trying to deliver benefits to their citizens. Then I also think about the ways in which AI is advancing science. There's some just spectacular things that have been happening in science. For example, we now understand using AI the structure of proteins and all these things that are just extraordinary. And then finally, because especially since we're both here at the UN, the potential for AI to advance the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, is incredible. In fact, the UN itself has done some work that actually shows that of the roughly 169 goals in the SDGs, something like 134 of them can be advanced and enhanced using AI. So the potential is huge. But I think to your point earlier, we have to be responsible. So there are some potential risks and complexities that we have to think our way through. As you said, sometimes AI doesn't perform as we would like it to. It might give you biased results. It might give you hallucinations. Yeah. It might do all of that. So we have to think about how we address that. Then you've also got the possibilities that it could be misused. People creating deep fakes and those kinds of things, and scams and so forth. But then we also have to think about some of the implications in how it changes things like work. So you kind of have these two things where there's extraordinary opportunity, but some things that we have to be very thoughtful and responsible about. I think that's what I think we as a world and as entrepreneurs, as society, we have to navigate and think through carefully.
Yeah, I was also here on Sunday. I saw Flood Hub.
Oh yeah,
one of those
I have to tell you about that. Actually, you know what's really cool about that is that it's been known for a very long time that if you could give advance notice to people with something like 5 to 7 days advance notice, that there are going to be floods, you can actually save up to, I think the UN says something like 49% of the damage can be reduced. But this has been a very hard problem. So about a year and a half ago, we experimented using AI to do these predictions, and we started in Bangladesh, and it actually worked. We were able to give highly predictive predictions about floods.
Yeah.
Now we've expanded it, as you probably saw in Flood Hub, to over 80 countries, covering something like 460 million people who now get flood alerts. So it's an extraordinary example of how AI can actually help make a difference.
I think on Sunday when I saw it, the first thing I went to was Nigeria.
To look at,
data, and I saw like the color coding and everything. So I know that is publicly available now.
Yes.
And people can see that. So speaking of more to home now, to Africa, what are some of those opportunities you are seeing regarding AI and Africa specifically? And if you have any personal story you want to share.
Yeah, I mean, I think the kinds of opportunities I was describing for people, the economy, startups, entrepreneurs, and transforming sectors, I think those are also very true for Africa. And in fact, I actually think it might be an extraordinary opportunity for Africa to leapfrog some of the limitations. I can think of, for example, various countries. I was just in Rwanda recently, where the ability to provide, healthcare to everybody is often limited by the number of either maternal healthcare practitioners that they have. So if AI can help extend that and get to more people, that's a big deal. I think about the opportunity for people to discover information in their own languages. One of the things we're spending a lot of time on at Google with things like Google Translate, which is, by the way, enabled by AI, is, I remember about 3 years ago, we were only doing something like 30-something languages, and that left out a lot of the world. And now we've actually just taken that up and been able, using AI, we're now doing 246 languages. And in fact, in the last 6 months, we added another 110, and of those 110, I think half of them are actually in Africa. So I think the more we can have people in Africa be able to participate, access information in their own languages, I think it's a big deal. So I think I see those kinds of opportunities. I also see, for example, what entrepreneurs are doing, building applications that are specific to Africa, either in agriculture, in operations. So I think this might be an incredible leapfrog opportunity for Africa, but we need to make sure that the capacity, the skills, the support for entrepreneurs is there so they can actually take advantage of this. I think that's where we have a lot of work to do. And quite frankly, that's where, we as the private sector, as African entrepreneurs, African governments, I think we all have to work together to make sure the capacity, the infrastructure is there so that Africa can really take advantage of these opportunities.
Yeah. Something you mentioned about skills, the digital infrastructure, those are sort of helping build the right foundations. Do you have any other things that we should take note of? Like, what are all those things that would help build the right foundation and also help Africa with tapping into the opportunity that AI presents to them?
Well, I think when I think about on the people side, skills are one thing. For people to understand the basics of AI and how to work with these tools and these capabilities, whether as workers or as entrepreneurs. The other is also to give them the actual tools, developer tools, access to compute, access to data, access to AI models. One of the things we've begun to do, by the way, is to give some of our most capable models in an open source form. So we have a model called Gemma, for example, which is one of the very capable models, which is available in open source and open weight, so people can take advantage of that. So I think there's a lot on the people side. I also think we need to invest in, on the people side, in being able to do AI research in Africa. So that it's not just research coming from the West Coast, right? So, for example, we opened a research center in Ghana, where a lot of the research that we're doing is in Ghana. Our research center in Kenya, for example, is doing this extraordinary work on open data for open buildings, to build maps and so forth. And actually, we're now taking that to the world with the research coming out of Africa. So the more we can actually do AI research in Africa that not only benefits Africa, but quite frankly, also the world, that's extraordinary. So there's a lot on the people tools front. that I think we need to do. But I would also say there's some other things that many of us have been talking about, which I think can continue to be a challenge for Africa. The fact that access and data costs a lot.
Yes.
Devices cost a lot.
Yeah.
In fact, it's you may know this already, which is if you compare the cost of data and devices, Africa has some of the highest costs. So we have to do something about that. How do we make sure devices are easily accessible, data and connectivity doesn't cost as much as it does, because those will be limitations for Africans being able to take advantage of this.
Yeah. You mentioned GEMA. How do you spell GEMA?
Oh, GEMA, G-E-M-A.
Okay.
It's a variation of, our most capable models are called, it's called Gemini.
Yes.
But GEMA is a lightweight, smaller, but it's probably the most capable open source model of its kind. Yeah. And we've made that available in open source.
I want to speak more about you mentioned stuff about the cost, and you mentioned stuff about how devices are expensive, data is expensive. Do you have anything to maybe say regarding how you're going about helping with funding or cost reduction or things like that, specifically in Africa?
Yeah, we're trying. I'll tell you what we're doing on the data front. Part of what we've been doing on data, and I'll come to devices in a second. On data, we've been trying to help build infrastructure. So, for example, and Google started doing this very, very early. In fact, the first fiber that we laid down and cables that we laid down were back in 2006, something called the CCOM cable. And most recently, we built the Equiano cable, which starts from the top of Africa all the way down the coast, all the way down to Cape Town. And we've invited and encouraged governments to connect to it, because if that provides more connectivity, that should take down some of the fundamental basic data costs. And most recently, early this year, we announced the Umoja cable, which starts out in Central Africa all the way down to the southern part, and then all the way across to Asia and to Australia. So that's some of the investments that are going to contribute to lowering the data costs in Africa. So that's an investment that we're making and inviting others to collaborate and partner with us. I think on the devices side, as you know, we have Android, which is our operating system for mobile devices. We're starting to work with telcos and even the African Development Bank to think about how do we help with the financing of those devices so that at least they don't cost as much. So these are some of the things we're trying to do. But I think it's going to take, quite frankly, not just Google, but partnerships with device manufacturers, with governments to connect to these systems, to make the whole set of things cost much less than they do. But this is some of the work we all have to do.
I feel like maybe I have a follow-up question is what countries have you piloted this partnerships specifically for low-cost devices? Do you have any examples?
Well, we're trying to do it regionally because, so for example, in East Africa, we're doing some partnerships. In Southern Africa, we're doing some partnerships. On the data front, we literally are inviting every country that wants to connect to it. So Togo is connected to it. Ghana is also connected to our cables. In the case of the Umoja cable, Rwanda and the Rwandan government are ones we're collaborating with to connect to those cables. So from our point of view, it's important to do these things at scale so that and try to benefit everybody, not just one or two countries. Yeah. That's at least the approach. So we're looking for partners. One of our key partners, for example, is Cassava Technologies, which is an African company that we're trying to do lots of things across the continent with, again, to provide access to lower the cost of data and connectivity. So we're looking for partners, collaborators to do these things with. I should also mention some of the things we're doing with universities, with African universities. This is mostly from a research and skilling standpoint. So these are some of the investments we're trying to make, but it's going to take all of us.
Yeah, it is. And speaking of partnerships, there's the fact that governance, let's bring the conversation back to AI. There's the fact that governance is important for a responsible state of AI for everyone. I would know also because part of the reason why I came here was to speak to the State Department, specifically people in the government for cybersecurity, and how that is also very crucial because there are people that can just attack. Governments want to go online, should go online. They should go to the cloud, and people can attack them because of that if they don't use the right cybersecurity models. And maybe it ties to AI, but speaking of AI, you're on the UN Secretarial Advisory Board, and you are a very important voice when it comes to AI, especially globally. How should Africa be looking at maybe not just AI, but if you could also touch on cybersecurity and the partnerships with governments?
Yeah, I think this is very, very important. In fact, one of the things one of the recommendations that we made, so when we were doing the work on the Secretary General's high-level advisory body, which I've been co-chairing, we noticed a few things. If you look in the last 2 or 3 years, there's been this flurry of summits and declarations and governance things that have been going on. And we noticed that, something like 7 or 8 countries that actually participated in all of them. And there's another roughly 118 countries that have not been in any of them. And most of those were in the global south, especially in Africa. So I think part of the gap on a governance and participation standpoint is Africa has to be part of the conversation. And when I say Africa has to be part of it, it's being part of it in several ways. One, which is to participate in the development and use of AI. And a lot of that has to do with some of the things we were talking about earlier, such as access to the components, the enablers, the infrastructure, the models, the compute,
research as well.
The research as well. So there's that kind of Africa has to participate and be included in that. The other part is also Africa has to be involved in all these discussions on governance, and should not be left out of these governance conversations and the summits. So many of the recommendations you'll see from our high-level body had these components in mind, which is, can we make this a lot more inclusive? Can we talk about standards, governance, coordination, infrastructure, frameworks as inclusive as possible and not leave Africa out? So I think this is one of the key things we're going to have to work on for Africa, which is as much as possible, enable Africa to participate in the development, use, governance of this technology. I think some of that, quite frankly, is going to come down to how we think about collaborations and partnerships, not just by governments, but also by the private sector, whether it's the private sector with companies like us, or companies in Africa and entrepreneurs in Africa and businesses in Africa. That's going to go a long way. I'll tell you one other thing that would also help from an African standpoint, which is something that other regions have done well, and Africa, I think, needs to do well, which is, can we think about Africa as a whole, as a kind of a free market or free. I hear this all the time from everybody, right? From entrepreneurs who have a hard time because they have to deal with this country and then this country and then this country, even with, it's hard to operate across Africa. You hear that from entrepreneurs. You hear that from workers who can't get visas.
I think it was Dangote that was on stage and he was saying, like, I can't go, the border.
Even he can't get around.
He needs 20-something visas
Absolutely.
to move around. So,
in fact, it's actually easier if you have an American passport to go around Africa than if you've got an African passport.
I went to Europe. I had a Schengen visa. I went to 5 countries in 10 days.
With one visa.
Just one visa. And I'm like, I'm seeing commerce flow. I'm seeing things flow across Europe. Why don't we have this here? I feel...
Well, and I think the reason why that matters, especially when you talk about these technology opportunities, is that, it's the only way you get to scale. Because imagine if you're an entrepreneur and you're trying to get funding, whether it's from venture capital or from wherever, and what you present to the potential funders is a market the size of your own little country. And unless you're Nigeria or another really big country, that is very limited, right? Because whereas somebody who's starting a company, say, in Europe can say, sure, I happen to be country X, but I can play across the entire EU and I can scale my business across the entire EU. So I think we often constrain African entrepreneurs by not having a much larger kind of free market, free trade agreement that allows entrepreneurs and businesses to operate. It also makes it difficult even for companies like Google when we're trying to either bring services or collaborate with local entrepreneurs and businesses if we're limited by, and they're limited by these kind of country by country kind of considerations. So I think this will, think about Africa as a market and it's a scale market. Because if you think about Africa as a market, it's as big, if not far bigger,
It is
than
young,
Europe. I mean,
young
there's
as
what?
well.
Oh, and young. Oh, that's you see, that's the thing that I find most exciting about Africa, which is it's a young population. It's entrepreneurial as heck. Look at you, right? Look at the things that you're doing, right?
I mean,
there's a lot of African entrepreneurs who are doing extraordinary things. So let's not limit them. Let's not put roadblocks in them. Let's make it easy to scale what they're doing, capitalize, and make it easy for funders, investors to fund these young entrepreneurs and businesses. I think that's the imperative for all of us.
Yeah. I have two more questions, and one is regarding the safety and ethics of AI. There's the chance of AI being used for deep fakes, and that can cost a lot. I have a personal story where someone took my image,
Right.
cloned my voice somehow, and made a video saying, invest in this thing, I bought this car, and they edited it so well, it was quite convincing actually. Those are some of the risks. You can actually potentially scam someone with that. How is Google sort of working to ensure like safety and the ethical use of AI?
Well, so a few different things. I think first of all, when it comes to misuse of these technologies, we're trying to do a few different things. So one of the things we're trying to do is to introduce what are called watermarking techniques, so that you can tell, or there's a way to kind of watermark something that is synthetically generated. So we've invented a technology called SynthID, which we're putting in all our generative systems. So think of that as a watermarking technique. That's one of the things we're doing. We're also investing a lot in technologies to try to detect when things are synthetically generated, even if they didn't have a watermark. And then we're also working with others in the industry around industry-wide frameworks. Because keep in mind that it's not enough for one company to do it. I think we need the whole ecosystem to have these principles and frameworks in place. And I think that takes, so with many of our peers in the industry are working in these coalitions to see, can we agree on frameworks? But I also think ultimately, there's an important role for regulation here when it comes to use and misuse. So I think there's not going to be a silver bullet on this issue. I think we're going to need a combination of all of these things, some technical solutions, some industry-wide frameworks and agreements, and some regulations about how all this technology can and should be used. But I think it's also important to think about, and this is what makes all of this quite complex, which is what you'd want in different contexts is different. So think about, what often people talk about your use cases that are your money, your life use cases. Mm-hmm. That's a phrase to mean things that involve financial transactions or health, your life, meaning life and death, or health and medication. You want to treat that a little differently, perhaps if you're talking about things that are purely entertainment. So even in thinking through regulations, thinking through how what you'd want to have may vary by either sector or use case or domain is also quite important, because the same technology used over here may be perfectly fine, but used in this way over here is not okay. So I think that's a lot of the work on regulation that's important.
Yeah. One of the conversations I had with the State Department was regarding regulation.
Yeah.
And that was very interesting, because they're like, you cannot over-regulate something like this, because and one of the private sector too is like, you can over-regulate AI because it's going to be a thing where it will stifle innovation in a way, but you should regulate it because of all these things that we're talking about. I don't want to go too deeply into the conversation, but maybe it would be a nice segue to look at the future of AI, the next 5 to 10 years. We can't tell the future, but what trends are you seeing?
Yeah, first of all, I'm happy to comment on the regulation question, by the way. I think, I believe, and I think my colleagues and I believe, that AI is too important not to regulate, but it's also too important that we must regulate it well. Yes. And I think the way I think about it is that, regulation should do two things. On the one hand, it should obviously address the risks and complexities that we were just talking about, the things that we don't want. Yeah. But it should also enable the things we want. We want AI to address healthcare, to improve health. We want AI to help us with climate change. We want AI to improve people's lives. So regulation should both address the risks and complexities, but also enable the things we want. To your question about
The future.
what lies ahead in AI, boy, the field is moving so quickly and progressing so quickly. I think, the technical developments are coming fast and furious. We now have systems that have multimodal, as you know. We can do images, video, text, code, all of these things. We now are moving to where we have systems that have long context, where you can put in a lot of things. There's a term that's coming into play, which is the idea of building agentive systems, where not only can they generate outputs, but they can actually start to do some of those tasks for you and actually do actions for you. So all of that is coming. The fact that we now have systems that can do reasoning, the fact that just this summer, one of our AI systems actually won a silver medal at the International Math Olympiad. Right, which is phenomenal. The fact that we now see AI helping us to do breakthrough science is extraordinary. One of my fun ones from early this year is that one of our AI systems was actually able to do the first synapse level mapping of a piece of the brain cortex, human cortex, which hadn't been done before. So I think both the beneficial uses for people, these breakthroughs in science, and I think are coming very, very quickly. But I think as the technology advances in that way, the questions when it comes to ethics and responsibility also change. So the questions we're going to be asking in the future may not be the same ones we're asking now or asking a year ago or 10 years ago. So they're going to change too, as the technology advances, and it forces us to ask new questions. And also as we learn from users, I think what's interesting is that each day we're learning, this is a general purpose technology. We're discovering uses of it that we didn't think were possible. We're often surprised by what we see innovators and entrepreneurs and even users use this technology for. So, you could use it for that. That's interesting.
Yeah.
So there's a lot that's going to need to be very adaptive here as the technology, but it's I'm actually quite excited about the possibilities, but I think we have to also be responsible in how we approach it.
Thank you so much for your time. This was a very insightful conversation, and
what do you use? What AI technologies do you use?
I mean, I just got a new phone, and I'm using Gemini to summarize web pages. And I'm not saying that because you're Google.
Right.
I'm also using the iPhone as well. And I use a lot of phones. I've used over 150 phones. Yeah, because it's my job.
Right.
So I test all of them. And I basically try to see, just like you said, these are the conversations we're having now. They're not the same conversations we had 4 years ago.
Right.
And I don't think it will be the same in the next 4 years. So I'm really just looking forward to how everything changes and how that grows together with our devices. Are we going to be using wearables now? Are we going to be using glasses now? What would it be? What would the next platform sort of be? But overall, I'm just excited, and I'm learning a lot this past 2 weeks. So.
Well, that's good. Actually, I'll point you to two things you may find interesting.
Yeah.
So go try out something called Notebook LM.
How do I spell that?
Notebook. As a
Notebook,
notebook, and
okay.
then LM. Go try that. I think you'll have fun with that.
Okay.
And then go watch something. If you think about the future, go watch a demo that we showed at I/O this year for what's called Project Astra.
Okay.
Go check that out. I think it'll blow your mind.
Okay. Thank you. Thank
All
you
right.
so much.
Good to talk to you.
Good to talk to you as well.
All right. Thank you.
Awesome.